So we might make a start. I feel like I want to come forward because we're all sort of down the back. Hope you can all hear me okay. My name's Debbie Snell. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Academy Director for Bale. And so welcome to our first peer group meeting of the year. And so it's really nice to see some familiar faces and some new faces as well. So what we've been trying to do with the peer group meetings this year, Dr. Joe Nunnally, our knowledge translation specialist, has done a bit of a revamp of what we're doing with our peer group meetings. We're going to have some themes, and so today's theme is looking at researchers who've used participatory action research in their projects. And so we're really lucky to have two presenters today talking about their Masters and PhD work. So our first speaker is Ellie, who is a physiotherapist and clinical educator at the School of Physiotherapy, University of Otago. So her main interest is in neurorehabilitation, having worked both in acute rehabilitation settings within the CDHB prior to her current position. And some years ago I worked with Ellie in the concussion service at Burwood Hospital, which was lovely. So Ellie is currently halfway through her PhD thesis entitled Access to Physical Activity for Men Following Stroke. And actually also I would really like to welcome some of her blokes who are here today. It's really nice that you guys could come and join her as well. So, thank you.
Okay, thanks Debbie. Thank you for the invitation to come and present my first PhD study with you today, and I've had a fantastic opportunity to complete a participatory action research project, or PAR as I'm going to call it through the presentation, with a group of men with stroke. So in PAR I've worked collaboratively with these men to explore the user-friendliness of fitness facilities, and today I'm going to share the findings that we found through this exploration, and also just touch on my thoughts about building an enabling society. And before I begin, I'd just like to acknowledge, as Debbie has said, some of my co-researchers who are here today, so thank you for coming, and also my supervisors, Dr. Hilda Mulligan, Dr. Gisela Sol, and Emeritus Professor David Thomas. So how did this study come about? Well, about 10 years ago, I was a physiotherapist here working at the Brain Injury Rehabilitation Service, and I was working with people with acquired brain injury, mainly stroke survivors, and as a way to decrease outpatient waiting times, we set up a group circuit training program. And what we found, and what I observed, once they were on the program, they were really physically active and enjoying things, but once they were discharged back into the community, what we found was that these people were not physically active or demonstrated very low levels of physical activity, and so this got me wondering why. So overseas research shows that people with stroke demonstrate very low levels of physical activity. The research also shows that stroke survivors are largely absent from fitness facilities. And we also know that stroke survivors face many accessibility barriers when they're trying to access physical activity at fitness facilities. But we don't actually know how this pertains in the New Zealand context. So my research question was, what elements contribute towards or limit user-friendliness of fitness facilities for male stroke survivors in New Zealand? Okay, so we've used a participatory action research methodology, and largely because from the literature there didn't seem to be many people that had the lived experience of fitness facilities, so this was a way of finding out their experiences. And it's also reflected in the nothing about me without me phrase. So for participatory action research or PAR to be successful, there needs to be a collaboration that's set up between the researcher and the participants. And through this collaboration, mutual learning will occur, which will generate new knowledge and facilitate personal growth, self-determination and self-efficacy to empower the participants to take action for change. And this change, this personal change could be at a personal level, at a community level or a societal level. So I'm going to show you a framework that I've adapted from User-Friendliness in 2012, which explains consumer participation in research projects. So on the left-hand side of the diagram, you'll see that researchers and consumers work together to identify a question or a problem, and they work collaboratively together in a cyclical fashion, going through planning, acting, and reflecting. So the PAR group cycles, the individual participants and the researchers' reflections and social ecological system outcomes can be explored. And on the right-hand side of the diagram, we can also evaluate the impacts of the research through societal change and sustainability. So what did I do? Well, actually I identified the question, and that was through my own personal experience and through the literature. And I invited stroke survivors to collaborate with me on this project. And interestingly, only male stroke survivors volunteered to participate. So that's just how it came about with the men. So the final PAR group was made up of me as the researcher, 7 male stroke survivors who were living in the community, and they were greater than 6 months post-stroke. And we also had 1 female partner join the group. The great thing about PAR is that you can join people on as much as you like. And it was great that we could have this female partner join the group, because she provided the transport for her male stroke survivor, and otherwise he would not have been able to come. So we completed 5 PAR cycles. So the first cycle, I talked to each of the men individually about their perspectives of physical activity, their accessibility issues, and their goals for the project. And next, each of the participants individually explored a fitness facility of their choice, which could have been a gym or a swimming pool or a combination of the two. And then as a group, we went to visit a commercial fitness facility. And by the time we got to the 4th PAR cycle, we met with a disability advocate and just had a really good discussion about accessibility issues that we'd found so far. And to close the loop, I evaluated the PAR processes and outcomes through individual interviews with the men. So what did we find? So we found 2 overarching themes, and the first one was that participation in physical activity appears to be determined by the stroke survivor's personal factors, the inclusivity of the built environment, and societal influences towards people with disabilities. The second overarching theme that we found across the whole of the PAR cycles was personal growth and empowerment for the participants. So just starting with the first theme, we found that the participation in physical activity was determined first of all by the stroke survivor's personal factors, and the men described how their intrinsic motivation facilitated them to engage in physical activity. And they were motivated for improved health and well-being, improved function and participation in life roles, which this we quote highlights. Well, I want to get my independence back. I don't want to be reliant on others. I have a little granddaughter in London, and the motivation to be at some stage active to get to London is at the forefront. If the men described or demonstrated self-efficacious behaviours such as self-confidence, perseverance, determination and acceptance of the stroke, they were much more likely to engage in physical activity. As this man suggests, you've got to be self-motivated. A lot of other people I saw with stroke were not going to get right because they don't want to push boundaries. It doesn't worry me if I put my hand up if I can't bloody do something. So finally, the men described how their stroke-related impairments, so their fatigue, their cognition and their physical impairments from the stroke influence their engagement in physical activity. And as one man described, getting in and out of the car was the most debilitating thing. It was the pitch, and it took a while for my wife to catch on. So next, the men described how inclusive the fitness facility built environment was and how that could influence their engagement in physical activity. And the men discussed inclusive systems and policies at fitness facilities. So if they had inclusive mission statements, a range and flexibility of programs for people with disability, and if the fitness facility marketed, particularly for that it was accessible for people with disability, that would largely influence whether they would be physically active there. However, they don't always get it right. So even though our gym is very user-friendly and the staff is so personable with you, no, they've never thought of advertising we welcome people with disabilities. How user-friendly, so how accessible and usable the fitness facility was also played a part in whether the participants would participate in physical activity. And the men described 3 built environment features that determine their participation. And so in no particular order, they talk about parking. So parking is either not close to the building, or it is close to the building but so far away from the accessible access it was a bit pointless. They also talked about doorways, and I'm just going to highlight the doorway issue with a quote. If you have to pull a door towards you, no matter how heavy it is, it becomes a burden because you have to walk backwards with it. I've only got my right hand, so I have to get the door back and trap it with my foot so that I can get up and inside. This is a door that epitomises this quote. This is the worst fitness facility door ever, and it actually exists in one of the participants' gyms. So if you imagine that you have only one side of your body working, your arm might be in a sling, your leg might be stiff, your foot pointed, so your balance is going to be pretty precarious. What this participant needed to do was try and get up onto that step, and it's quite a high step. You have to, with one hand, hold your hand over with your card to swipe, or hold it over the sensor, and really quickly try and grab the door handle before the sensor thing goes off. And then you've got to try and pull the door backwards because it's on a heavy spring. As you can see, that the sweep of the door takes the entire platform. So they've got to try and step back, get off, hold the door open, and then try and step back up. And it's actually impossible. So it's not accessible. And they also talked about toilets. So having either no room in the cubicle, or a door that was a heavy pull towards you, spring door. And sometimes the accessible toilets are not visible, they're tucked away in the corner of a building. So the men did provide some inclusive solutions. So for the toilets, having sliding doors, much bigger cubicles. For the doorways, they talked about the absolute best door ever was an automatic door, whether that was a sliding or an automatic opening. And the second best door was a manual slider. For parking, they talked about drop-off zones. And so having a drop-off zone, you can spend more of your energy on your targeted exercise program at the fitness facility, rather than spending half of your time trying to get to the fitness facility and then you're exhausted before you get there. The men also recognised that society can influence whether they would engage in physical activity. They talked a lot about societal attitudes, so attitudes of health professionals, gym staff, members of the community, family members and friends. And they will all determine whether someone will engage in physical activity. The men talked about needing to feel safe, valued, accepted and supported. And this is represented by this quote. Sometimes I get the impression from other people that people like me shouldn't be in the community. They are not good people. There are some extremely good people. The secretary of the Bridge Club, she would try and help me. The men also had a much more heightened awareness about societal legislation in terms of the built environment. And they became aware that actually the legislation is minimal standards, and these minimal standards are so vastly, can be interpreted in so many different ways, that it becomes a problem, that actually it would be a miracle if a building was built that was universally designed and inclusive for all people. They also had an awareness about social equality, and the men understood that equal rights is not a reality for them, and that society can often treat them negatively and unequally. They had this acceptance that not all buildings were going to be accessible, and interestingly they also talked about having that there's probably a hierarchy of access. So putting that in the context of fitness facilities, a fitness facility that was solely for people with disability would be universally designed, fully inclusive. A council facility should be accessible and usable for people with disability, but it might not be. But commercial fitness facilities, so the likes of Les Mills or Anytime Fitness, that those people who own those buildings could choose whether they could be accessible or not. They also talked about the demeaning nature of unequal access, and this is a wee quote. To access, and it's not about a fitness facility, it's about a bar in town. To access this particular bar, you have to go around the side to a wrought iron gate that is locked, ring a bell, and wait, and wait, and wait until someone decides to come and unlock it. So you win. Okay, that's just demeaning, degrading, and disgusting, and it makes you feel like dirt. I was quite excited that my co-researcher sent me on a little jaunt around Christchurch to take some photos to see if we could make a continuum of doorways actually. And I was driving by, this is a new build since the earthquakes, and I was like, oh, this is exciting. And they have got this equitable access, so they've got the ramp and they've also got the stairs coming up to a common platform. But unfortunately, the doors are not universally designed for all people. They are heavy pull towards you spring doors, mostly impossible for people to get in independently. And the men talked about how these automatic doors, in terms of societal equality, they do even the playing fields, don't they? They are one thing that make it even for everyone. So moving on to the second overarching theme, the men also describe elements of the PAR process that facilitated their personal growth and empowerment. So they talked about leadership, and initially they sought leadership from me as the researcher to guide the PAR process. Communication between the group facilitated positive and constructive discussion. They all felt they had an opportunity to actively participate in the project, and they felt that they'd set achievable goals. And all of the men described how much they enjoyed the process. And because they were interacting with like-minded individuals, they had a lot of fun, and they felt like they were making progress. And here's just a couple of quick points to highlight those points. So about leadership, I think we looked to you to start with to help us, give us some parameters. It didn't take us long to get past those. I think we as a team ran the operation. And about enjoyment, I loved it. I loved the contacts I made, I loved the various challenges we committed ourselves to and met, and probably superseded in some cases. So these factors allowed the men to produce tangible results, which gave them the confidence to address accessibility issues in the community, and that gave them the sense of self-worth. The support from the group allowed the men to open up and talk, which generated new knowledge, and by the end of the project, the men talked about how they'd changed personally, becoming advocates for accessibility issues in the community. But they also acknowledged that by doing PAR, it's an ongoing process and you could keep going and going and going. But they acknowledged the fact that their advocacy in the community would continue. So here is an example of how one participant in the group was empowered to become a disability advocate in his community. He wrote to his local newspaper to talk about his personal experience of accessibility in the community, which facilitated some dialogue. So there was 2 more newspaper replies, and from people with disability in their community just having a discussion. And this has led to this participant being invited onto his local council accessibility committee, which is really exciting. So how do these findings link to show that the participants were empowered to make change? So I made a model to illustrate the successful PAR process with stroke survivors. So at the bottom of the diagram, across time and PAR cycles, what seems to me is the absolute foundation ingredient is collaboration. It's absolutely key. So things like communication, the active participation, the group support and enjoyment, they are all ingredients to foster this successful collaboration. And through that collaboration, mutual learning will occur, which will generate new knowledge, facilitate personal growth and empowerment to take action for change. This stairway to empowerment seemed to happen through the men becoming enlightened about accessibility issues and moving through the steps to make personal change. It was absolutely fantastic to see how one of the men of the group became empowered across the course of the project to make personal change, and he really struggled initially with this idea that all buildings must be accessible for what he considered was an absolute minority population, even though he was now one of this minority population, and this is what he said. I think I've become more aware of the problems people with disabilities face, of what I now face. I think that is a worldview change. It has added to and moved my thinking from a little intolerant, like, why should a building owner spend millions for a few people? My thinking has moved on, and I can now see the other side of the picture. So just to try and pull this all together into how we might go about building an enabling society, so just to summarise the factors that influence a stroke survivor to be physically active at a fitness facility, is their personal factors, so their physiological impairments, their fatigue, cognition, their physical impairments, psychological factors, so their motivation and their self-efficacy, and also environmental factors, so the inclusivity of the built environment, how user-friendly is it, what are their systems and policies like, and also the social environment, so other people's attitudes, this notion of social equality and societal legislation. But from all of these factors, what seems to be the overarching influence on whether someone will engage in physical activity is societal attitudes and knowledge. And just to give you a few examples, so legislation is developed by experts and local and central government representatives. And so that legislation is going to be influenced by their knowledge and attitudes of people with disability. And building developers and architects, they are influenced by the legislation, but also their own personal knowledge and attitudes. We also know from a very small body of literature that the people most close to the stroke survivor have a very powerful influence on whether they will engage in physical activity. So their attitudes and knowledge will also make a difference. So here's where I've got to in my thinking about an approach to begin to build an enabling or an inclusive society in terms of fitness facility inclusivity. So going back to our model of PAR with stroke survivors, I wonder if this is an approach to creating successful change. Because firstly, enlightening society about disability issues is absolutely paramount, because until society recognises the need for change, to be inclusive for all of the population, fitness facilities are largely going to remain inaccessible. And I wonder if the key to doing this is trying to form this collaboration with the entire community. I've also wondered if 5 men, like 7 men working in a collaborative way can make personal change. Perhaps this idea of collaboration, if we took that and applied it in our communities, it may be an approach that allows individuals to mutually learn from each other, to generate new knowledge and a better understanding of disability issues. And this may empower them to collectively take action for change towards building an enabling society. So that's kind of my wee theory, where I've got to, and I've actually got no idea how this is actually going to work in reality. The only thing that I've come to in my thinking is that if we could get able-bodied members of society, so the building developers, the architects, local and central government representatives together in a room with people with disabilities and collaborate around these issues, we might start to have some success. But those are just my thoughts. So just before I open up the floor to hear your thoughts, I'd just like to acknowledge the World Academy of Independent Living for their funding of this project, and also my participants, my co-researchers, because without their continued dedication, this project went from 8 to 12 months, and actually sometimes I just ask them to come and do a few more things. So without their dedication, it's just been